I heard it. A whisper slicing through the late afternoon quiet. A sound not meant for my ears. A crack in the veneer of our shared life that vibrated through me like a struck tuning fork. The nursing home. That's the easiest way. My daughter, Sarah, said, her voice low and tight. My son-in-law, Mark, responded with a grunt of agreement. A sound that usually meant nothing, but now felt like a hammer blow to my chest. A final, definitive period at the end of a sentence I hadn't known was being written. I was in the kitchen, carefully wiping down the countertops. The scent of lavender cleaner, usually a comfort, but now it seemed to choke me. A chemical harshness in the air. Was it a joke? A cruel jest shared between husband and wife. A casual cruelty tossed into the domestic hum of my own home. The home I had worked my entire life to provide. The very walls that had echoed with laughter and sorrow, and the relentless, exhausting rhythm of single motherhood. How could they speak of me like this? As if I were a piece of furniture to be rearranged, an inconvenience to be managed, a problem to be solved and hidden away. What had I become in their eyes? After all these years, after every sacrifice, every quiet struggle, every silent, loving devotion. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a day like any other, or so I had believed. The sun, a pale winter guest, filtered through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, oblivious to the earthquake that had just rattled my world. I had just finished preparing a light lunch for little Lily, my granddaughter, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich cut into neat triangles, a glass of milk, a few apple slices. Lily was in her room, a cheerful chaos of toys and coloring books. Her bright, innocent presence, the sole source of unburdened joy in my increasingly muted existence. Sarah and Mark were in the living room, their voices usually a background murmur, something I had grown accustomed to, something that usually faded into the hum of the refrigerator or the distant chirping of birds. But today, their words had cut through everything, a sharp, cold blade. "She's becoming too much," Sarah continued, her tone edged with a weariness I recognized, but had always thought was directed at the world, at her demanding job, at the relentless pressures of modern life. Never at me. Never at her mother. "We can't keep doing this, Mark. It's not fair to us. It's not fair to Lily." My hands, which had been so steady moments before, now trembled, the damp cloth slipping from my grasp and falling with a soft plop onto the polished linoleum. I stared at it, a small white rectangle against the beige, a symbol of my sudden, devastating helplessness. My breath caught in my throat, a thick lump of disbelief and pain. My own daughter, my only child. How could she say such things? How could she even think them? How could the child I had poured every ounce of my being into, the child I had loved with a fierceness that defied explanation, now be plotting my institutionalization? Had I truly become such a burden, so disposable, so easily dismissed? The conversation continued, a slow, methodical, chipping away at my dignity, at my very existence. They spoke of financial strain, of the need for more space, of my supposed forgetfulness, of how I was constantly underfoot. Each word was a fresh wound, each shared glance between them, a confirmation of their unspoken conspiracy. I leaned against the counter, the cool surface doing little to calm the frantic beating of my heart. A lifetime flashed before my eyes, a tapestry woven with threads of sacrifice and relentless effort. I remembered the endless nights, rocking Sarah to sleep, humming lullabies while the world outside slept, while my own exhaustion threatened to swallow me whole. I remembered the dual shifts, working at the diner during the day, cleaning offices at night, my hands chapped and aching, my body perpetually weary, all to ensure Sarah had new shoes for school, a decent meal on the table, a future brighter than the one I had known. My husband, Sarah's father, had left when she was just 5. A crumpled note on the kitchen table, a packed suitcase, and a lifetime of broken promises. I had been devastated, adrift, but the sight of Sarah's innocent, trusting eyes had anchored me, given me purpose. I became a fortress, a shield against the harsh realities of a world that didn't care for single mothers with no safety net. There were no handouts, no easy paths. Only the grinding effort of turning $1 into 2, of making sure the lights stayed on, that there was always food in the refrigerator, even if it meant I went without. I remembered the shame of charity, the humiliation of asking for help, only to be met with indifferent stares. I had sworn then that Sarah would never know that kind of struggle, that she would have stability, a home, a sense of belonging. This home, this house, this 3-bedroom bungalow with the small, sun-drenched garden was my Everest. I had worked for 30 years, scrimping and saving every penny, foregoing luxuries, denying myself even the smallest pleasures, to buy it outright. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine, a testament to my resilience, a sanctuary. When Sarah married Mark, a man whose charm, I now realized, was as thin as his ambition, I had offered them a place to stay. They were struggling, they said, just starting out. I remembered Sarah's tearful plea, her assurances of gratitude, of how they would help around the house, contribute to bills, be a comfort in my old age. It had felt like a natural extension of my motherhood, another act of giving. I had even, foolishly, perhaps out of an overabundance of love and a desire to secure her future, put her name on the deed, making her a co-owner, a gesture of trust, a symbol of our unbreakable bond. How naive I had been, how utterly blind to the darkness that could fester within the very heart of family. For years, it had been a gradual erosion. Small slights, easily dismissed. My opinions becoming less valued, my presence more tolerated than welcomed. My attempts to offer advice met with dismissive waves of the hand. My quiet observations about the garden or the grocery list met with impatience. I was the silent cook, the invisible cleaner, the ever-present babysitter. Lily, my sweet Lily, was the only one who still saw me, truly saw me, not as a burden, but as her Nana, the teller of stories, the baker of cookies, the gentle hand that brushed her hair before bed. Her small, warm hand in mine was the only connection that felt real, unburdened by resentment or calculation. As their voices droned on, dissecting my future with a cold, clinical detachment, a strange, steely resolve began to form within me. It wasn't anger, not yet, not fully. It was a cold, quiet shock that hardened into something unyielding. They thought I was old, frail, forgetful. They thought I was a puppet, easily manipulated, easily put away. They had underestimated me. They had forgotten the woman who had clawed her way out of poverty, who had faced down every hardship with grit and determination, who had built this very house, brick by emotional brick. They had forgotten who I was. But I hadn't. I spent the rest of that afternoon in a daze, moving through the house like a ghost. I fed Lily, helped her with her homework, read her a bedtime story, all the while a frantic, chilling calculation spinning in my mind. Every smile I forced, every gentle touch, felt like a betrayal of my own pain. That night, sleep was a distant memory. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the shadows playing tricks in the corners of my room, turning familiar shapes into monstrous specters. The words echoed and re-echoed, the cold, stark reality settling in with an unbearable weight. I was unwanted. In my own home, by my own child. The silence of the house pressed in on me, heavy and suffocating. The sounds of their muffled voices from the living room earlier had been a thunderclap, but this silence, this post-storm quiet, was even more terrifying. The next morning, I woke with a new clarity, a sharp, almost painful focus. The tears that had welled up in the dark of the night had dried, leaving behind a hard residue of resolve. The old woman they saw, the one they plotted to dispose of, was gone. In her place was the single mother who had faced down every impossible situation, who had learned to fight for what was hers, for what she had earned. I would not go quietly into that good night. Not from my home. Not from my life. My first step was a silent one, a tremor beneath the surface of our seemingly normal household. I made breakfast, just as I always did, the scent of coffee and sizzling bacon filling the kitchen. Sarah and Mark were their usual selves, absorbed in their phones, exchanging terse remarks about their day. Lily, bright and chatty, filled the void with stories from school. I watched them, a cool detachment settling over me. I saw my daughter, the curves of her face so familiar, the set of her jaw so like my own, and felt a profound, aching distance. How could the girl I had known, the girl I had cherished, have transformed into this stranger? I held Lily's gaze, her innocent eyes reflecting a warmth that was now a balm to my wounded spirit, a stark contrast to the coldness that had seeped into the very fabric of my family. After breakfast, I went about my chores, tidying, folding laundry, tending to the small details that held our household together. My movements were deliberate, methodical, but beneath the calm exterior, my mind was racing, planning, strategizing. I needed information, solid ground to stand on. The house, my house. I knew the deed had my name on it, that much I was certain of. But the specifics, the legal language, the implications of co-ownership, these were a hazy landscape I needed to navigate. Later that afternoon, when Sarah and Mark were at work and Lily was at a friend's house, I made my move. I carefully retrieved the worn leather briefcase from the back of my closet, a relic from my late husband's days, filled with dusty documents, old photos, and tucked away in a special compartment, the original deed to the house. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the crackling parchment, the legal jargon swimming before my eyes. My name, Clara May Jensen, stood prominently at the top, followed by Sarah Elizabeth Miller, née Jensen, co-owners. I remembered the conversation, years ago, when Sarah had asked me, almost casually, if I would add her name. For future planning. Mom, she had said, her eyes wide and earnest. It'll make things so much easier down the road, for inheritance, for everything. I had agreed, of course, because she was my daughter, and because I trusted her implicitly, because I wanted to give her everything. Now, that act of love had become a weapon pointed directly at my heart. The next day, after much deliberation, I opened my laptop, a device Sarah had given me years ago, mostly used for email and the occasional online recipe. With slow, painstaking keystrokes, I searched for elder law attorneys near me. The screen populated with a dizzying array of names and addresses. I scrolled down, looking for something that felt right, something that didn't feel like a predatory advertisement. My finger hovered over a name, a small practice tucked away in the historic part of town, Eleanor Vance, Esquio, Family and Elder Law. Her website was simple, reassuring. Her photo showed a woman with kind, intelligent eyes. I took a deep breath, and with a courage I hadn't known I possessed, I clicked the call button. The appointment was set for Thursday morning. I told Sarah I had a doctor's appointment, a white lie that felt like ash in my mouth, but was necessary. Dressing carefully, I chose a sensible navy blue dress, my good sensible shoes, and a pearl necklace that had been my mother's. I wanted to appear composed, serious, not a frail old woman, but a woman with purpose. The lawyer's office was quiet, tastefully decorated. Eleanor Vance, a woman in her late 40s, with a warm smile and a firm handshake, put me immediately at ease. I sat across from her, clutching my briefcase, and began to tell my story. The words came out haltingly at first, choked with emotion, but as I spoke, as I recounted the years of sacrifice, the gradual decline of respect, the overheard conversation, a strange sense of catharsis washed over me. Eleanor listened patiently, her expression grave, her pen scratching occasionally on a legal pad. When I finished, the silence in the room was profound, punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic outside. "Mrs. Jensen," she began, her voice gentle but firm, "this is a deeply unfortunate situation, but you have rights. As a co-owner, and frankly, as the primary financial contributor to this property, you have significant standing." She explained the complexities of joint tenancy, the implications of my initial investment, the legal avenues available. The relief that flooded me was almost overwhelming, a light in the suffocating darkness. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't invisible. Eleanor outlined a plan, a formal legal notice, requiring the other co-owners, Sarah and Mark, to vacate the premises within 30 days. It was a bold move, an aggressive one, she admitted. But given the circumstances, given their clear intent to remove me from my home, it was, she believed, the most effective. My heart hammered in my chest. Evict my own daughter. The thought was agonizing, a betrayal of everything I believed family should be. But then I remembered their words, the casual cruelty, the cold calculation. They had already evicted me from their hearts, from their consideration. This was merely a legal formality, a reclamation of what was rightfully mine. The days that followed were a delicate dance, a performance of normalcy. I continued my routines, cooking, cleaning, caring for Lily. But every interaction with Sarah and Mark was now filtered through a lens of profound knowledge, a chilling awareness of their true intentions. I watched them, observed their casual disregard, their easy assumptions that I would always be there, a convenient fixture, a free service provider. It fueled my resolve, hardening the pain into a quiet determination. I took Eleanor's advice to heart. Gather documentation. "Mrs. Jensen," she had said. "Anything that proves your ongoing contributions, your primary ownership, your care for the property. Tension is never why." So, with a meticulousness born of desperation, I began. I started a small, unassuming notebook, tucked away in my recipe drawer. In it, I jotted down dates, times, observations. I noted every time I paid for groceries, every utility bill that came in my name, every repair I had funded out of my meager savings. I began to take discreet photos with my phone, a skill Lily had taught me. Photos of the garden I meticulously tended, the thriving rose bushes, the neatly trimmed hedges. Proof of my labor, my investment of time and love. Photos of the freshly painted guest room, a task I had completed just last spring. Painting supplies paid for with my own money. Photos of the meticulously cleaned kitchen, the sparkling bathrooms, the organized living room. It felt strange, almost voyeuristic, to document my own life in such a way. But it was necessary. It was my shield, my evidence. Simultaneously, I turned my attention to the finances. For years, Sarah had managed the household bills, a gesture she had framed as helping me, easing my burden. Now, I saw it differently. It was a subtle, insidious way of exerting control, of keeping me in the dark. I requested copies of bank statements, utility bills, internet service providers. What I found was a slow, sickening confirmation of their indifference. Service bills, internet and electricity, had gone unpaid for months, accumulating late fees. The house was at risk of service interruption, a detail they had conveniently overlooked, or perhaps simply not cared about. My stomach churned with a mixture of anger and disbelief. This was not merely neglect. It was a deeper level of betrayal, a sign of their fundamental disrespect for the home, for the stability I had painstakingly built. With a heavy heart, I transferred funds from my personal savings, money I had set aside for unexpected medical emergencies, to cover the overdue amounts. I called each service provider, politely but firmly updating the contact information, ensuring all future notifications would come directly to me. I made sure my name was the primary account holder, reinforcing my position as the true head of the household, a role I had allowed to slip away, almost imperceptibly. Over the years, this quiet, methodical reclaiming of control felt both empowering and profoundly sad. Each payment made, each contact information updated, was a step towards severing the ties that had bound me to their will. But it was also a painful acknowledgement of how those ties had been frayed, almost broken, by their indifference. Through it all, Lily remained my anchor. Her unadulterated joy, her innocent affection, was a lifeline in the turbulent sea of my emotions. We would spend hours in the garden, planting seeds, watching the butterflies, her small hand nestled in mine. She would chatter about school, about her friends, about her dreams, and in those moments, the pain would recede, replaced by a fierce, protective love. I knew that whatever happened, whatever storm lay ahead, I needed to protect this bond, this pure, untainted connection. She was the one true light in the deepening shadows, the reminder of why I had fought so hard, why I was still fighting. The day the official notice arrived, delivered by a quiet, uniformed process server, was etched into my memory with a searing clarity. Sarah and Mark were having dinner, a tense, silent affair that had become the norm in our house. Lily was already in bed, tucked in by me, her innocent face oblivious to the storm about to break. I was clearing the table when the doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent chime that made us all jump. I opened the door to find a young woman, holding a clipboard and a thick envelope. "Mrs. Miller. Mr. Miller," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "I have a legal document for you." She handed the envelope to a stunned Mark, who took it hesitantly, his brow furrowed in confusion. As he opened it, as his eyes scanned the official legal language, his face turned from confusion to disbelief, then to a dark, simmering rage. Sarah, watching him, reached for the paper, her own eyes widening as she read the words, "Notice to quit and vacate premises within 30 days. The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. They looked up at me, their faces a mixture of shock and betrayal. "Mom," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "What is this? What have you done?" As a few tried to find minus, I met her gaze, my own eyes. I hoped, steady and unwavering. "It's exactly what it says it is, Sarah," I replied, my voice calm, but with an underlying steel that surprised even myself. "This is my home, and I'm reclaiming it." Mark slammed his hand on the table, a sudden, violent crash that made me flinch. "Your home. We live here. We're co-owners. Remember, you can't just kick us out. This is insane. Things now, then matter 44, they will go into you." "I can," I stated simply. "And I am. I've consulted a lawyer. I've reviewed the deed. And I've also reviewed the unpaid bills, the services you neglected. The expenses I've been quietly covering for months. This house, Mark, was paid for by my sweat and my tears. Every single penny. I invited you to share it, to be family. But you have mistaken my generosity for weakness, my love for blind foolishness. To this tan stam away, and the natted him. The argument that ensued was brutal, a torrent of accusations and recriminations. Sarah wept. Tears of what I suspected was more self-pity than genuine remorse. Mark raged, his face contorted with anger, calling me ungrateful, selfish, a cruel old woman. They spoke of how much they had done for me, the sacrifices they had made by living with me, the burden I had been. Each word was a fresh wound, but I stood firm, a quiet resolve emanating from me. I was done being their doormat, their silent servant. I was done being invisible. I repeated Eleanor's words in my head, a mantra against their onslaught. You have rights. This is your home. I can't to be pretty bows. They tried to negotiate. Mom, let's be reasonable, Sarah pleaded, her voice now softer, more calculated. We'll buy out your share. We'll give you a fair price for your half. My half. The audacity of it. The gall. There is no half. Sarah, I said, my voice cold. There is only my investment, my lifetime of work. You put nothing into this house but your presence. And frankly, lately, that has been a deficit, not an asset. And no, I will not sell you my home. This is where I will live out my days. In quotes, the friends from there. The days that followed were a cold war within the walls of my own home. The air was thick with tension, a palpable hostility that permeated every corner. Sarah and Mark rarely spoke to me, communicating instead through pointed glances and muttered remarks. Meals were eaten in silence, or with forced, saccharine conversations directed at Lily, a thin veil, attempting to conceal the raw animosity that seethed beneath. I continued my routines, meticulously, calmly. I cooked, I cleaned, I gardened. I spent even more time with Lily, her innocent presence a shield against the venom. We read books, baked cookies, her small hands helping me stir the batter, her bright laughter a beacon of hope in the gathering gloom. I knew they were making plans, whispering late into the night, their voices low and urgent. I heard them on the phone, the hushed tones, the frantic energy. They were scrambling, caught off guard, their carefully constructed future of my quiet disposal crumbling around them. My heart ached for the family we once were, the promise of warmth and connection that had long since withered. But there was also a growing sense of vindication, a quiet triumph. I was taking back my life, my dignity. As the 30-day deadline approached, the atmosphere became even more unbearable. They grew increasingly desperate, their attempts at manipulation more transparent. Sarah tried tears, begging me to reconsider, claiming she had nowhere to go, that I was tearing her family apart. Mark resorted to veiled threats, hinting at legal battles, at making my life difficult. I met each attempt with a quiet, unyielding resolve. My lawyer, Eleanor, had prepared me for this, advising me to remain calm, to not engage in emotional warfare, to simply reiterate my position. This is my home, I would say, my voice steady, and I need you to respect that. Gone to the scrade that it was mazid having on the find, and instated conting the grafins, audited as not contin, without quieted entinidid. The day before the deadline, they began to pack. The sounds of boxes being taped, of furniture being moved, echoed through the house, a mournful symphony of departure. I watched them, a profound sadness mixing with a strange sense of liberation. They only packed their own belongings, their clothes, their personal effects, a few pieces of furniture they had brought with them years ago. They left behind the things that were truly mine, the pieces of the house that had always belonged to me, the life I had built. Lily was confused, her small face clouded with worry. Nana, where are Mama and Papa going? Why are they taking their things? I held her close, stroking her hair. They're going to find a new home, sweetie, I explained softly, trying to find words that would soothe her without betraying the raw truth. But Nana will always be here, and you can always come to visit. It's many Pete. On the morning of the 30th day, they were gone. A final slammed door, a screech of tires on the driveway, and then silence. A profound, aching, beautiful silence. I walked through the house, room by empty room. Their furniture was gone, leaving faint indentations on the carpet, ghosts of their presence. The air still carried the faint scent of their perfumes, their lingering presence a phantom limb. But it was also cleaner, lighter. The oppressive weight of their resentment had lifted. I stood in the living room, the winter sun now streaming through the windows, unobstructed by their clutter, illuminating the dust that had accumulated, a symbol of the neglect I had tolerated for so long. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of activity, a furious purging. The very first thing I did was call a locksmith. The old locks, so familiar, so easily compromised, were replaced with new, sturdy ones, a tangible barrier against the past, a symbol of my reclaimed security. Then came the cleaning, a deep, thorough scrubbing that went beyond mere tidiness. It was an act of purification, of washing away the lingering traces of discord and disrespect. I scrubbed floors, wiped down walls, polished every surface until it gleamed. Each swipe of the sponge felt like an exorcism, each burst of cleaning spray a blessing. Next, I embarked on a renovation project, small but significant. The walls in the living room, which had been a drab beige chosen by Sarah, were repainted, a cheerful, soothing sky blue, a color I had always loved but had been dissuaded from using. The guest room, once cluttered with Mark's unused exercise equipment, became a small, tranquil library, filled with books I had collected over the years, a comfortable armchair, a reading lamp. I moved furniture, rearranging pieces until each room felt like an extension of myself, a reflection of my taste, my peace. I replaced worn curtains with new, brighter ones, letting in more light, more life. The house began to breathe again, to feel like my time's home, truly and completely, for the first time in years. With the physical space transformed, I turned my attention to rebuilding my life, to filling the newfound peace with purpose and joy. I had always been a solitary person, my life consumed by motherhood and work. Now, there was space, time. I remembered Eleanor's parting words, her gentle suggestion to reconnect with the world beyond these four walls. Don't isolate yourself, Mrs. Jensen, she had advised. Find your community, your joy. It aras taldinet. My first step was tentative, a small act of bravery. I had always admired the prayer group at the local church, hearing the hymns drift through the open windows on Sunday mornings. I had often thought of joining, but life, and Sarah's subtle discouragement, had always intervened. Now, with a deep breath, I walked through those doors on a Wednesday evening. The warmth of the community embraced me immediately. Kind faces, gentle smiles, the shared comfort of faith. I found solace in the hymns, in the quiet contemplation, in the genuine camaraderie. It was a balm to my still aching heart, a reminder that connection and kindness still existed, that not all relationships were fraught with pain. Then, inspired by a flyer I saw at the community center, I enrolled in a knitting class. My mother had taught me to knit as a girl, a skill I had long since abandoned. The rhythmic click of the needles, the soft feel of the yarn, the slow, satisfying creation of something beautiful, was therapeutic. It was a meditative process, allowing my mind to quiet, to focus on the simple, tangible act of creation. I met other women there, some widows, some empty nesters, all seeking connection and creativity. We shared stories, laughed over dropped stitches, and slowly, gently, new friendships began to bloom. I also reached out to old friends, as women I had lost touch with over the years, caught up in the relentless demands of life. A phone call to Carol, a former colleague from the diner, led to a tearful reunion over coffee. We talked for hours, catching up on decades, sharing the triumphs and heartbreaks of our lives. It was like finding a piece of myself I hadn't known was missing, a reminder of the vibrant, independent woman I had been before motherhood, before the weight of others' expectations had muted my own light. These connections, these rediscovered friendships, filled the empty spaces in my heart, not with a frantic effort to replace what was lost, but with a gentle, nourishing warmth. The house, once a battleground of silent resentments, was now a sanctuary. I woke with the sun, drank my coffee on the newly painted porch, watching the birds, tending to my garden. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock. These were the sounds of peace. I could read for hours in my new library, listen to classical music, or simply sit in companionable silence, enjoying the solitude that was no longer lonely, but liberating. The relationship with Sarah and Mark, however, remained a raw wound. For weeks, there was no contact, only the gaping silence. Then, a hesitant text message from Sarah, then a phone call, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and a brittle, fragile regret. The initial conversations were difficult, fraught with defensiveness and pain. She accused me of being cruel, of abandoning her. I listened, calmly, and then, when she was finished, I simply stated my truth, without anger, without accusation. I didn't abandon you, Sarah. I simply reclaimed my own life, my own home. You chose to leave. And the way you treated me, the way you spoke of me, made it clear that I could no longer live under the same roof as you, not with any dignity. It was life to Dushan. This was the hardest part. The emotional work that felt more exhausting than any physical labor. Eleanor had advised me on this too. Boundaries, Mrs. Jensen, she had emphasized. Clear, firm boundaries are essential for any healthy relationship, especially after such a breach of trust. She suggested therapy, both individual for Sarah and Mark, and perhaps, eventually, family therapy. To my surprise, Sarah eventually agreed. She started individual sessions, and then, after much persuasion, Mark joined her for marital counseling. I didn't know the details of their sessions, but I hoped, truly hoped, that they were beginning to confront their own issues, their own resentments, their own blindness. Sarah also slowly began to distance herself from certain relatives, her father's side of the family, who, I now understood, had been a source of insidious, negative influence, subtly feeding her resentment towards me over the years, painting me as the villain in a narrative of their own making. It was a small, almost imperceptible shift at first, but it was a hopeful sign, a recognition that she needed to cut ties with the voices that had encouraged her worst impulses. Months passed. The initial anger and bitterness slowly began to recede, replaced by a cautious, tentative attempt at rebuilding. Sarah called more regularly, her voice softer, more reflective. She spoke of her therapy, of insights she was gaining, of a dawning understanding of her own role in our fractured relationship. She apologized, truly apologized, for the first time, a tearful, heartfelt confession of her shame and regret. It wasn't a quick fix, not a magical erasure of years of pain. But it was a start, a fragile bud of hope in the barren landscape. The most important connection, the one I cherished above all else, remained steadfast, my relationship with Lily. She continued to visit me every week, sometimes for a day, sometimes for a whole weekend. Her laughter echoed through the house, a joyous counterpoint to the quiet peace. We baked, we gardened, we read stories, we simply were. Her small, warm hand in mine was a constant reminder of unconditional love, a pure, unwavering bond that transcended the complexities and heartbreaks of adult relationships. I found my dignity again, not just in the legal victory, but in the quiet act of choosing myself. I found my self-determination in the small daily decisions, the freedom to paint my walls blue, to spend my afternoons knitting, to reconnect with old friends. The house, my home, was no longer just a physical structure. It was a symbol of my liberation, a testament to my resilience. My life had not ended with the betrayal. It had, in fact, begun anew. At 68, I was entering a new phase, a period of what I could only describe as blossoming. I was learning to love myself, to prioritize my own well-being, to live according to my own terms, not in reaction to the needs or expectations of others. The scars remained, the memories of betrayal, of the sharp pain of being unwanted. They were woven into the fabric of my story. But they no longer defined me. They were simply a part of the journey, a journey that had led me back to myself, to a place of profound peace, of quiet strength, of joyful independence. The silence in my home was no longer heavy with unspoken resentment, but light with the promise of each new day, a canvas for the life I was finally, truly, living for myself.